One of the real concerns with growing older is isolation and loneliness. I remember my best friend, Raleigh, and his mom was in her mid to late 90s when she died. And she said, all my friends are dead, and then one of the difficulties about moving to some place that's a continuum of care place or assisted living is that certain percentage of those are going to die, within a given period of time. And so people can feel like their world is just getting smaller and smaller, which is partly, from my point of view, is why you need to keep expanding your world as you get older.
All right, welcome to another edition of Chasing the Timeless podcast. Today I have an amazing pleasure to have Jim Winship with me. He's an icon here in our city and involved in lots of different activities. And he runs an organization called Beechwood True, LLC, which is about creating stories. And why don't you just kind of tell me about that?
Sure. So I am I describe myself as a spouse, parent, social worker, retired college professor, documentary filmmaker, and storyteller. And I taught social work at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater for 35 years, doing some other things at the time. And when I retired in 2016, I started an LLC, a business, Beechwood True. And the name comes from, the Beechwood comes from Beechwood Street, where I grew up in East Tennessee, Bristol, Tennessee, with these beautiful beech trees that circled the house. And the true comes from a statement that a storyteller said, my stories ring true. Not all of them are factual, but they ring true. And I think that's the goal with stories, in whether it's oral stories or documentary films or using stories for other purposes, to make sure that they ring true.
I know your son is involved in some of this.
Correct. Yeah. So our son Parker has an MFA from American Film Institute, and lives in Milwaukee now, which is good, and makes short films, and is in the initial stage of trying to make a feature-length film. But he and I have been working on documentaries since 2020. We made a documentary, What We're Hungry For, how food pantries fed rural Wisconsin during the pandemic, that did well in film festivals, and we've shown it around the state for purposes of raising awareness, and it's now available on YouTube for people to see.
Last spring, I had my son just graduated from college, and the first thing we did is I wanted to travel with him someplace, and he chose probably one of the hardest places to travel. We went and spent some time in India, but being with him in a whole new context where he's just not my son and I'm taking care of him, but we're doing stuff together, facing adversity together, really had a big impact on what we were able to learn about each other. So how is this?
Oh, it's great. It's great. So, so my son's 40 years old.
Yeah.
One, I just enjoy spending time with him. We're very fortunate that both of our children enjoy spending time with us. And we've got a lot of similar interests, but the filmmaking has been really good because we have different perspectives and different skills. Mm-hmm. And when we made the food pantry documentary, the first one, and it's also true for what we're doing now, the documentary working on growing older in rural Wisconsin, is that I come from social services, nonprofit background, and so I see things from that framework. And he's always just been about films and making films and encyclopedic knowledge of those. But so he's got really good perspective because he doesn't know that world. and so he's able to comment on it. Plus, he's got the videography skills and he's got the editing skills that are necessary for making really high quality films.
I think having that creativity and wanting to learn, really brings out things that you probably have taken for granted.
Sure,
it's just like it's common knowledge about stories.
Yeah, so it's been good. Yeah, that's been good, and the last project in which we've talked to older folks, oldsters, as I refer to us, around Wisconsin, mostly in central and northern Wisconsin, for almost 18 months of filming, and I've learned a lot, and so that's all. It's a great process.
Yeah, my dad has just recently gone through a major health change in his life, and he's now in a care facility, which was kind of a hard decision a few weeks ago. But the whole process of taking care of him has really brought us together and given insight on each other in ways that we didn't have.
Yeah.
So what kind of stories are you looking to do next?
So two things. One is the documentaries are big stories, and raising money for this is harder than I thought it was going to be. So we're in the process now of trying to put together probably a 10 to 15 minute clip that we can show prospective donors, and see if we can get the money then, because the really expensive part of filmmaking is post-production. It's the editing, sound, color, all those special effects. We don't need many, but there's some graphics work we're going to need, and all of that. So, and then once we've got that, then which is in some ways the fun part, is taking it to film festivals, assuming film festivals want to do that, and trying to show that and promote it. So, in terms of big stories, I don't have any ideas beyond this. This is, I don't really want to think anything. Then I also do storytelling, so that I'm perform some. I've actually got a house concert here in Whitewater at the end of March. Woman who's moved to Whitewater a few years ago teaches at UW-Milwaukee, and she's a storyteller, and Sarah Beth's been doing house concerts at her house. And so with another storyteller, we're doing one together at the end of March, and mine is Getting Lost and Finding a Way, in which I'm combining a number of different kinds of stories into about a 40-minute presentation.
Okay, so there's so many ideas that are just like bouncing through my head right now. I don't even know which one to ask you about first. You mentioned how documentaries are just a really complex, lot of stories coming together, especially one where you're trying to gather stories of lots of individual people. So what's the process of coming up? Do you come at it with, I want to tell this story, and how much of your story changes as you're talking to people, and how do you find the important elements? What's your criteria for defining this is something that it's worth talking about?
So we've probably got 75 to 80 hours of film, which part is what makes it daunting for something that we hope is a 52 to 55 minute documentary. And I'm in my academic role. I did qualitative research. I mostly in El Salvador on youth and migration. And the qualitative research is you really start from asking questions, and then you wait and see how the story develops. And that's the same thing we've done with the documentaries, not really knowing what it was going to be as it started. The food pantry one, we had a chronology, because it was during the pandemic, and that kind of helped somewhat to organize it. This one has changed as we're going along, and I think the two kinds of things that are coming to the top are one, just the whole way in which the rural environment in which people live and the rural context, and how important that is, and how it shapes their lives, and how people want to stay there. And the other part is just people, making meaning in the third age of their life, in the last few chapters of their lives, because the dominant narratives of getting old are either vulnerability, timidity, wasting away, or you get the things about the super oldsters, the 100-year-olds who are running marathons, and so you really have both of those. And so really what we're able to tell, what we're hoping to be able to tell, is just people who are finding their way, in the last chapters of their lives, and last chapter sounds pretty final, but it can be a lot of chapters, and we've had, hold on just a second, I want to make sure, 3 people who have died, since we started interviewing. The last one was a few weeks ago, and this was an 83-year-old, incredibly healthy, who got hit on a head-on collision at the top of a hill. A driver came over in the wrong side of the road. But there's that. But then it's just how are people enjoying life? One of the interesting clips, and it's going to be a very short one, are the cool dudes. So these are these 2 guys that we filmed in the January of 25 on the coldest day of the year. So they're when the lakes freeze over. This is in Watoma, Wisconsin. They go out on lakes. This is on Silver Lake, and so on Long Blades. And so they're out there whooping and hollering and having a great time. One's 75, one's 76. One's got new hips, et cetera, and so there's that joy, that people find. So we're hoping to tell the stories of a lot of caregiving, because it's the age of which people take care of each other, and some issues with healthcare. One of the most touching ones, I think, is a guy who had grown up in Wild Rose, Wisconsin, small town in Waushara County, lived there all his life, was in dialysis, and at, I think, 79, the dialysis center closed. And the closest one was 45 minutes away, and that was too far to get there 3 times a week, So he had to leave, and with very supportive children, ended up in assisted living in another community. But he's out of his context. He used to go and have breakfast 3 or 4 times a week with the guys at a coffee shop, and he can't do that anymore. And so there's that way in which changes in healthcare systems, et cetera, affects people in negative, or in some cases, makes it possible for people to live the life they want.
That's interesting. You talked about we build a life and a routine around who we see ourselves as being and what's important. And then life happens to everybody. And all that's taken away. And so is there like a struggle of people trying to find out, well, what is still continues here?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize, but I think the reality, and so I'm speaking from the point of somebody who's only a few months away from being 78. So this is in a way, this is my story as well. That's being told, is that people are multifaceted, and the more connections people have, connections with other people, connections with interests, organizations they belong with, all of that. I think the better they are when life hits you on the side of the head with a 2x4, because it's going to, it's going to happen to everybody, and the way in which people deal with that, I think, has a lot to do with their context, with their social network, with things like how well off are they? I'm when I talk about our situation, is the good news. I don't have to work a Quick Trip to pay the bills. Right? So and so for people that are more financially okay, it's things are easier. Andrew, one of the interesting things about the documentary is that we wanted to try to talk to people who are struggling financially. And all of the people that we talked about it said, yeah, and then backed off. And I think it's easier to talk to somebody if there are things in your life that are going well, right? When you're not, unless someone really is an advocate, and wants to use this as a platform for talking about a cause, is that people would say, I'm just going to keep that private. And I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. So this essentially is the documentary will really focus on people, none of whom are well off. Well off the way we think is in terms of probably, I'm looking up to try to think about that. I don't think there's anybody, that would really be considered upper middle class, but people who are comfortable enough in their older age to where talking about their lives is something that they want to do, or feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, there's those financial situations where people might feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But then also, I haven't achieved or become the person or gotten the recognition I've deserved mm-hmm. throughout my life. And I guess what I'm sort of thinking about is where, as far as people's comfort, besides the financial well-being, are there other personal qualities, ways they approach their life, growing up in rural situations, or just any number of ways that you see affect how people are mentally doing with getting older?
Sure. Yeah. And I think part of what I was saying, because as you're talking, I'm running the list down and to the participants, because we talk about the people in the documentary as participants, not subjects, and we'll show everything to everybody before it goes out on film, is that I think, and this is partly some of the reasons probably why we ended up contacting them. And hold on, I'm going to pause for just a second and just run through the list in my head. Yeah. But I think for almost all the people we've talked to are connected and they've got strong social networks, and have been active in various ways throughout their life. And because if you look at the data, one of the real concerns with growing older is isolation and loneliness, and it can be. I remember my best friend Raleigh, who lives in Norfolk, Virginia, and his mom was in her mid to late 90s when she died, and she said, all my friends are dead. And then one of the difficulties about moving to some place that's a continuum of care place or assisted living is that you're going to be around people who are not in great health, and so a certain percentage of those are going to die, within a given period of time. And so people can feel like their world is just getting smaller and smaller. Which is partly, from my point of view, is why you need to keep expanding your world as you get older.
Yeah, I never thought about the care facilities. You can think of the benefits that it provides and being able to get on with life. It's a better situation sometimes for the family and for the person going in because they have more people around them. But they're living a different story because they're seeing people coming and going and not in that better health. What about, how did you find people to talk to?
It's just you talk to somebody and you talk to somebody else and you talk to somebody else, and it started with one of the people in the documentary is Marty Lee, who was one of the 5 food pantry directors in What We're Hungry For, in the food pantry documentary. And it was really Marty who said, Jim, well, we need to make this film. And so she's co-producing it with me. And so she introduced me to some people in Washera County, and that's where we started. And then and then I met some other people. The first fall, which would have been the spring of 2024, I was up there and then talking to aging disability resource people and seeing it through them, if the people I could talk with. And I knew the publisher of the newspaper through the food pantry documentary, and talking with her about folks. And so it's just kind of, you talk to somebody and you talk to somebody else, and you go to a senior center and see if there's anybody who wants to talk. Well, you go to the public library in Wild Rose, and one of the people who works there was, somebody that she and her husband moved there when they retired, and she wanted to talk to us. And so all of those kinds of things. When we went up to Bayfield County, and I think, again, it was the start of that was because of the food pantry documentary, that one of the other food pantry directors was up in that part of the world, in Ashland, Bayfield County, and she put me in touch with some people, and then got to know some other people that way.
It's a really interesting topic, because so much of what we see in the media is about younger people and the feats that they're accomplishing and doing. Or if we talk about older people, it's like you said, like the people that are 100 years old. How can you be so healthy at this age? Mm-hmm. And you're just finding people where they're at.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And just individuals, and they each come with their own life stories. Is it hard to get people to open up or get used to the process?
I think the more you talk to somebody, the easier it is for them to talk. And so it's and there are several people we've only talked to once for one reason or another, but generally the more times you talk to somebody, the easier it is, and the more you've got to the question of, well, what's changed since the last time we talked? Mm-hmm. Because that gives us a little bit of movement over time. And so so up in Bayfield County, an 82-year-old woman who works part-time at this wonderful 24/7 community center in Cornucopia on the western part of the thumb of Bayfield County. And she's retiring. Well, she will have retired by now. When we last talked to her, she said she was retiring at the end of the year. It was the second time we talked. So you get that thing because she wants to spend more time in nature, mm-hmm. And so you get some of that the more you can talk to folks.
Yeah. What age range from the youngest?
Well, the youngest we're going to have, and we is probably in the early 60s. And Don works for an organization in Washburn County that does independent living. Neat organization, and they've got those around the state that will go into homes and tell people what they need to do in order to stay living there. Ramps, grab bars, maybe chair lifts to go up a flight of stairs. So he works with those, but he's also just really eloquent talking about how when you get older, there's some things that you could do that you can't. He says, and he's got some health issues that do that. He said, he's hunted all his life and hunted for meat, and so they would have deer. And he says that's getting harder, and chopping wood, and his back gives him problems. And so, is he going to have to buy wood, or just use propane, and so so we get his perspective there, and then a couple of people in their early 80s. So it's that range.
When people first start to talk to you, I mean, you have your questions, I assume, that you might have. Do they like to give their whole life story? I mean, it seems also there's that kind of story, like these are the things I did, very transactional. And then there's a story about how they're feeling. and how they see themselves. And
Yeah, and some of that we've already talked about before we ever get on camera. So then just to be able then to and then to talk about that, because of course the context is important. And so so that's. I'm not sure I actually answered the question, because there really is probably no template. I will start those with a series of questions, and it is rare or never that I will go down the questions the way they're all written. Yeah. Sometimes they get what people are saying will answer 2 or 3 of the questions. Sometimes they'll start talking about something that's more interesting than the questions I've got, and so we go there.
Have people changed? I mean, a story isn't just what you do, it's how you tell it. And I think that's what's really interesting about talking to you, is you can have 2 people, identical lives, and they may frame it very differently. How does the aging process affect how we frame things that we saw differently?
I think it. I think how one is doing at any point in your life frames the way you talk about things. When life is going well, you tend to look at things through more of an optimistic thing. When it seems like everything sucks, then when you think about your life, there can be a tendency to do things that way. And I think I know that, for example, in Cal Jenks, he was the person that we talked to that had to move to an assisted living, and Cal could talk. He could reminisce about his childhood, and that was good. But the present is just not great for him. I mean, he's got 3 very supportive daughters. None live really close. They've done some interesting thing with technology to keep in touch with him. But on a day-to-day life, his life is just, when we talked to him, there wasn't that much that he was looking forward to, okay? And you contrast that with Roger and Charlotte Stratton, who are farmers. Roger was able to buy this farm when he was in his early 20s, next to the one where he grew up. He wanted to have that farm since he was 12, and the people wanted him to have it, and I think they sold it on land contract. But he and his wife are just, they're active. They're very connected with their kids. He's on the town board. She's involved with the Historical Society. She's self-published a book. He does ornamental blacksmithing, and so you get people whose lives are busy and when they in doing good things. And so when they talk about their life, that I think that very much affects that. And when Roger talks about, health issues, it's like, I want to keep being able to put up hay. It's part of what I do. But it's not a, but there's not a negative. There's some realism there, but it doesn't have a cant. So I don't think it's as much as growing older as the way in which we grow older. Erik Erikson, we talked about stages of life, says that when we get older, it's either generativity or stagnation, which means you either open up or you shut down. And I think some of the studies on longitudinal studies on aging, more or less, that's generalizing, but kind of bear that out.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that it's kind of like which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Are you identifying anything about people's lives or their past stories and whether they're choosing to go out and engage in the community, or if somebody's just feeling down and they just do these things, get out there and be active, then that changes their outlook?
So I think what we'll do is we'll show what we've got, and then people may kind of draw their own conclusions in terms of that, as they should, because it's not, we haven't scripted this, in the sense of we never fed anybody lines, with the exception of somebody who had said something off camera. And we wanted to make sure that they said it again so that we could get it. So I think the story will come out, will be complicated, and my hope is that, that 5 people who see it will come away with somewhat different ideas about what was important about what they saw. And it may be in terms of oldsters who see it, what resonates with their life or what's scary about that. And the hope, and this is what Marty says, is that for people who are like in their 50s and thinking about, well, how do I want to prepare for getting older? And on a personal level, I was just tried to be very planful about what I wanted to be doing with my life when I wasn't working full time, because I didn't want to be in that situation of retiring and thinking, now what do I do?
I'm 54, almost 55 in a month, and one of the reasons I'm starting this podcast is because I'm thinking, well, how do I want to engage with the world? And this is a great way to meet people, to talk to people, to keep helping people out. I like the process of talking and the storytelling thing. So looking at, I see some similarities in isolation, with people with depression or younger people and how they engage the world. What's your experience of knowing about stories and how people think about their lives differently in different situations that
I think I think it's a big question, and so I may go at it a couple of different ways. I think that that for individuals, I think getting some kind of understanding, and I think the understanding is going backwards in terms of life as story. Thinking about that, and I think going back, thinking about your life as a thing of stories. And I think that that going back and looking at the decision points in your life, and I actually did a story. There's a venue in Spring Green, Wisconsin, at a bar and performance space Slowpoke, where once a month they have Night of Words. People read poetry or a couple of us will tell stories, etc. And so I make it there most months. And I was telling a story about a decision that I had made when I was early in Peace Corps in terms of where I wanted to live, and ended up living in one of the very poor communities with a family for the 2 years. And I think I understood the country in a much better way than I would have, and that really paid off in later life. But also just thinking back in terms of, okay, there were branching points in one's life, and understanding, okay, that either this was a good decision, or okay, I need to think about when I come to those kinds of decision points, what do I do? So that you don't burn any more bridges than you need to, or other things. So I think that's kind of useful. I think the other thing about story, and I'll go back to that. I think in some of those can be signposts about saying that this is, when this happens, this is a way to approach it. It also can be an exercise in gratefulness in terms of thinking about people in one's life that helped. And also just realizing that in some ways, just the randomness of life, that if I had not shown up on this day, if I had not met this person, if this, then my life would be different. And so I think that's all good. But I think as one thinks ahead in terms of what does one want one's life to be like, I think that also is you're kind of telling a story, and you're telling a story, and then the question is, if this is what I would like to be doing in my life, well, then what do I need to be doing now? The author Annie Dillard said, how we spend our hours and how we spend our days is how we make a life. And and I think that that's important. So I'll say all that. And then I also want to add to that the whole idea of the narrative fallacy. And the narrative fallacy is thinking like everything happens for a reason, right? And there is a way in which, and I think that's where you get conspiracy theories, because people put two or three facts and they'll say, well, they have to all be connected. And sometimes things are connected, sometimes they're not. And if you ask ChatGPT to do that, you will come up with a story that comes up with you as a hero and everybody else, in getting in your way in terms of the greatness that you are meant to achieve. But I do think if you think about what do I want the next chapter of my life to be about, is that's what's the story that I want to write for myself, and I think that's something that's useful at any age.
You talked about all these decision points in life, and one thing I've started to really try to embody and realize is that every point can be a decision point in your life. It's just realizing like that you have the power to make changes in your life. And if we're waiting for the rest of society to conform to how we expect it to be or the way it should be, or we're being treated unfair, we're getting a series of bad breaks in society, and that's where I'm at. If that's where your focus is, that's what your future is going to continue to be, because that's the mindset that you're looking at the world with. But once you say, well, maybe that's true, but what can I do right now to plan for the future?
Yeah.
And it may be something small, like making a phone call, looking something up that I'm going to, just learning about what my options are can be a first step. And realizing that it doesn't have to, that you have not necessarily control in the actual events that are going to happen, but you have control in the momentum that your life has. And that momentum may take you different places, but at least you're keeping it moving.
Yeah. And there is a way in which the story you tell yourself is that I'm keeping it moving. I for decades, really since 1975, I've been keeping journal. And I think, but in 2005, when I was and not as frequently in those first years, but I think by 2000 I'd been writing pretty much every day, and so I spend about half an hour in my journal almost every day. And when I ran into somebody in 2005 who talked about one thing she does in her journal is to write 3 good things about yesterday. And so I've started doing that. And so I've found that does 2 things. One is the smaller things is it's kind of good for planning in the sense of, well, anytime I go to the gym or back when my legs would still let me go out and run, that's a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. So you do that, you've already got one of them. But the other thing that really is helpful is that I had this experience sometime in December, and it was just a day where I just felt like it was just busy. There's some days in which you feel like you really didn't get anything done. You were just busy because you're going from one thing to another, things that were just calling for your attention. And just with a kind of unsatisfied feeling to it. And I got up the next morning and I was journaling and I said, wow, there were 7 good things about yesterday.
That you missed until you
exactly until I went back and said, okay, yes, it was a day that was too hectic to really be enjoyable, but it was a good day. Yeah. And so I think that, and that kind of gives one momentum, and especially because there are things in which I will write it down on 3 separate days between the day I started and the day I did something else, and then the day that I, finally got it out. And so I find all of that is helpful.
I think that's kind of, I hear a lot about gratitude and keeping gratitude journals. But I think is really something to that, because one, it frames your day going forward, but it also reframes your days in the past.
Yeah.
And where you're at.
Yeah. And I think I put some stuff on on notes on my phone about gratitude. So it's a little bit differently, because in a way it's the journal is really talking generally more about accomplishment, or just like hearing good news about a friend's health.
Yeah.
Okay, that counts as that. But I think the gratitude helps me kind of focus outwards, and just say I'm grateful. I'm grateful, for example, that the Whitewater has the aquatic center, right?
Yeah.
So I can drive there in 5 minutes and swim or get on a treadmill or do what I want to do. So you're grateful for people in your lives. You're grateful for, I'm grateful for our house. For the stovetop espresso. Because it makes really good cup of coffee to start the day.
Yeah, my coffee machine didn't work the other day. We were cleaning it, so I made the stovetop espresso.
Yeah,
and it takes a little bit more effort because you have to watch it and take care of the stove. But it is better.
It's good coffee. It's really good coffee. Yeah, we have 2 of those little guys that we put on in the morning. Yeah, and
I need a bigger one.
Yeah, and it's true, a bigger one. Yeah, but rituals are important. And it's a ritual that starts the day, and it kind of gets me going.
Ritual, yeah, can anchor us in positive frames of mind and positive attitudes. Where have you, looking at rural Wisconsin, being in the Peace Corps and other places, one of the happiest places I've ever been is Madagascar, which at the time was ranked by the United Nations to be the poorest country in the world. But people are always dancing and playing and singing. There's something that's framing and structuring their life that changes their outlook in a different way than a lot of Americans who have so much wealth and life easy. What do you think what was you seen in your life?
I don't know. El Salvador has been, which is a poor country, and it has gone from one different kind of crisis to another during the 50 plus years that I've been involved with it. But but at least for decades and decades, and even during the time of extreme gang violence, was ranked as one of the happiest countries in the world. And I tell people I laugh more when I'm in El Salvador than anywhere else. And there's that, and I will not try to intellectualize the reasons, because I think everything is, because culture is incredibly complicated. But I do think that there are places where things are. That's a place. I think when you switch to the rural areas, I think that that for many people, being someplace where things are moving slow is really good. I really found that when we're talking in Cornucopia in Bayfield County, people like the fact that it's that it's easy. As somebody said, when I'd have to go to Stevens Point for a doctor's appointment, the traffic really gets to me,
Mm-hmm.
And most people would not. Stevens Point's a city of 75,000, so this is not like driving in downtown Chicago, but even though there are lots of things one does without in some rural areas, Washera County, for example, doesn't have a movie theater. That would be hard. You're for me, but people what there is, and just the fact that you're out in the middle of nature, and nature can be, so beautiful, when one stops to appreciate it.
I think that slowness and stopping is so important. I've been watching some podcasts recently about the TikTok culture and how it rewires people's brains and how extremely addictive it is by design. Even kids that were taking tests, they give them a 10-minute break, and some kids would just rest. Some kids could, just surf the internet, and other kids were given 10 minutes to just be on TikTok. Just that short amount of time, when they came back, they had a 40% reduction in the ability to remember things and engage with the outside world. They're pulled back to that. And so much of people's lives with social media, and especially these short form videos where you just scroll endlessly, is pulling us from our engagement with the world, and we're looking for the internet for satisfaction rather than other people and those human interactions. And so thinking about how our being able to stop and just contemplate and being okay with. First, it may seem like it's boring at first, but then you realize, well, that's kind of part of that's where I get my energy from.
Yeah, it can be for many people. If one can slow down enough to do that,
Yeah. I think talking to you today has been really amazing, learning about the different elements that people bring to their lives, especially the interacting with people and the signposts that people have, and so that similarities around the world. And what's the website again?
Beechwood True.
Beechwood True.
Yeah.
An amazing thing. I've been to some music things at that storytelling event that you're having, and they put on some good shows. And thanks so much for being part of this podcast. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to look at this and really, hopefully, look at their life in new ways and think about, like, okay, how do I want to structure my life, and what stories am I telling me that are holding me back, and how can I break out of that? So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode and you know somebody that might be inspired by it, share it with them. To learn more about the show, go to chasingthetimeless.com.